and welcome to Novis, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Amanda, and I started this channel so I could research and discuss anything and everything strange. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, share the video, check out my socials in my link tree, and let me know what you think about today's topic in the comments below. In the description box, you will find links to all of the sources I used to research today's topic, as well as a suggestion form for other topics you would like to hear me discuss. I will not be posting a poll for the next few weeks, as I have some ideas for videos I want to create for the month of October. Since it is October, these videos will be a bit scarier than my normal videos, so be prepared for that if you plan to watch. Obviously, I will add appropriate warnings and not go into too much gruesome detail. Today's video is a very interesting one. I originally heard about this case while watching a recently uploaded video by 60 Minutes Australia, and I thought that it was really interesting. Little did I know, although that video was just uploaded to YouTube last month, it was actually originally aired back in 2016 and lacked a lot of information that came out after its original release. This ended up being much more in-depth than I originally thought, and it is quite long. I'm about to give you a lot of information, but it was all very interesting and I felt I had to share it. I've tried to organize it in a way that will be interesting and easy to follow for you. Finally, there's a brief mention of violence. It's not super long or graphic or anything, so no warning today. However, I will indicate when this part of the video is coming up in the comments, and also in the visual, so you can skip it if you want to. Without any further ado, sit back, relax, maybe grab a snack, and get ready for today's case. Hatton Garden has been the diamond center of London for centuries. Originally called Ely Place, it was home to mostly clergy from around 1200 until 1581. In 1581, Queen Elizabeth I gifted the property to one of her closest advisors, Sir Christopher Hatton. According to various sources, it is said that the Queen first became interested in Sir Hatton when she witnessed his graceful moves on the dance floor during a ball. Eventually, Queen Elizabeth I would knight Hatton and make him Chancellor under her reign. Known as the Dancing Chancellor, Hatton would end up building a great home for his family on the land next to the pre-existing beautiful gardens on the property, hence the name Hatton Garden. I found an interesting legend about Hatton Garden from this time, and it goes as follows. Lady Elizabeth Hatton was dancing with a young man at a ball in the Hatton house. They stepped outside to speak and disappeared into the night. No one saw either of them again until the body of Lady Hatton was found in the cobblestone yard beyond the horse stables. She had been, quote, torn limb from limb, and with her heart, quote, still pumping blood onto the cobblestones. This yard became known as Bleeding Heart Yard and still exists as a cul-de-sac of family homes today. There are many iterations of this story, but historians have concluded that it was made up over the years as people got confused about the different Hatton family members. From what I found, most of the family was named either Elizabeth or Christopher for generations, either by birth within the Hatton family or by marrying people with those family names. Anyway, as the population of London swelled, the Hatton family began selling off parts of the land to other wealthy businessmen and craftsmen to build their homes. Eventually, this area became known as London's Jewellery Quarter, because in medieval London, businesses for certain crafts or industries would cluster together to make production and trade more efficient and cost-effective. As such, the Hatton Garden area became dominated by skilled jewelry makers, gem experts, and leaders of the jewelry trade. Hatton Garden became known as an extremely reputable destination for all things related to precious metals and gems by the 1850s. With the abundance of wealth and treasure centered in one location, Hatton Garden became the focus of many criminals over the years. One of the first big burglaries in the area happened in 1913. Called the Hatton Garden Pearl Robbery, it is said that the Mona Lisa of pearls, worth over £17 million in today's currency, were stolen by a gang of robbers, but they were eventually recovered. Then both world wars happened, and during the Blitz bombings of London during World War II, much of the Hatton Garden area was destroyed. The old homes were leveled, allowing the government to come in and widen and update the roads before people could rebuild. Many families relocated out of the now bustling city center. New business buildings were erected, lining the streets, where ground floors were filled with shops and offices, and then the upper floors became apartment housing, allowing many more people to live in the once exclusive area. With the increase in business and thus the risk of theft also increasing, there came a need for secure areas to keep valuable finished pieces, precious raw materials, as well as family heirlooms and the small fortunes these artisans had created for themselves over the generations. On June 28, 1946, Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Limited was incorporated. Shortly after, they began building a brand new state-of-the-art high-security vault in the basement of 88-90 Hatton Garden, an unassuming 7-story building with an understated sign located on either side of a small black door. The first of its kind, this vault was said to be the safest place in London. The vault was a bunker made of reinforced concrete that was several feet thick, a huge metal door attached to its frame by thick metal hinges, and multiple bolts that cannot be opened without the key. Once inside, huge metal cabinets holding 996 individual safe-like safety deposit boxes filled the vault. To open a box, both the customer and the security guard had to simultaneously put their keys into their respective locks. The box could never be opened with a single key. All of this was in the basement of a building behind even more security measures. Clients were given personalized key fobs and codes to get into the front door. Then, they would have to give their account name and password to a receptionist located behind bulletproof glass. Once past the lobby, the security guard who was escorting the customer would open several more doors and gates with keys before they made it to the vault door. They even had lasers and motion sensors. Interestingly, although customers had to give their name and address when renting a box, they were never required to record what was actually in the box that they were storing. Furthermore, there were private special rooms where customers could go to place items into the boxes or take their property out. In recent years, these private rooms remained free of any kind of surveillance, including CCTV. These private rooms led to speculation that not just jewels and gold was being stored in the vault. People believed that local crime bosses also stored guns, drugs, laundered money, and all kinds of other criminal property. Still, shortly after opening for business, 3 men would try to rob the vault. However, they were unsuccessful and fled the scene before police could apprehend them. This cemented in the minds of both the customers and the criminals that Hatton Garden Vault truly was impenetrable. Unlike other specialized districts in London, which have disappeared over the years, Hatton Garden remains the heart of the United Kingdom's jewelry trade today. Interestingly, it's also the only private-owned road left in London. The Hatton Garden Vault has been described as a dream job for criminals and as, quote, the Olympics of the criminal world. Still, it stood secure for decades despite having little to no upgrades to the security systems during that time. That is, until April of 2015. On Tuesday, April 7th, 2015, the first day back to work after the long Easter holiday weekend, Hatton Garden Safety Deposit Limited security guards arrived to work to find their gates cut through and pried open. 3 boreholes were cut through the concrete wall of the vault, and safety deposit boxes were strewn around, their contents of unknown amounts missing. Remember, customers did not have to record what was in their boxes, so police had to go to each customer, find out what had been there, and what, if anything, was missing. This did take time, however, police were both thankful and confused about why the burglars had only opened 73 of 996 potential boxes. Even more fortunately, of the 73 boxes that were opened, 29 were empty at the time. Still, the sheer amount of treasure in the vault made this one of the largest heists in English legal history. News outlets went wild. Initial reports estimated that up to 200 million pounds of loot was stolen, and that the likely suspects were a highly trained commando team from Eastern Europe. The Sunday Express stated, the gem thieves may be part of the infamous Balkans-based Pink Panther gang. The Daily Express asked, did a 35 million pound gem gang use a contortionist? Authorities were shocked to find on CCTV that the gang of criminals had first entered the building on Thursday, April 2, 2015. At around 8:20 p.m., a white van with no logo or identification other than the license plate pulled up and men dressed as gas repairmen exited. However, they got back into their van and appeared to be waiting for something. It turns out that a workaholic jeweler who rented a shop at the back of the building was still in the shop with a customer. This man, named Lionel Whiffen, was known to the gang as they had been surveilling the area previously. They thought his long work hours may interfere with their plot. However, around 9:20 p.m., Whiffen would leave his shop, lock the gate behind him, and get in his car and leave. Finally, the burglars could put their plan into action. A man in a disguise opened the front door of 8890 Hatton Garden with a key and walked right in. The mysterious man was wearing what appeared to be a red wig with a hat on top of it. He also had a mask covering the majority of his face. Shortly after entering the front of the building, he made his way to the back of the building where he opened an emergency fire exit to the side street where the rest of the gang was waiting. They filed out of the white van and into the building carrying various bins on wheels full of burglary equipment. Once in the lobby, the gang called the elevator to the second floor and subsequently disabled it. Back on the first floor, the gang could then jump down the empty elevator shaft and gain entrance to the basement. On their way, they were kind enough to tape an out-of-order sign to the elevator door. Once at the bottom of the shaft, they pried open a metal shutter that had been added to the old elevator door opening when the elevator stopped running to the basement due to security issues. They then had to pass through two metal gates. The first was electronically secured, and the man in the red wig disabled it quickly. The second gate required a key, so the men resorted to brute force, sawing through the bars and then prying them out of the way. Finally, in the main hallway outside of the vault, the red-haired man disabled the remaining CCTV cameras and the remaining alarm on the door just outside the vault. Once opened, they had to enter a specific code in 60 seconds, or the security company would be contacted. After entering the code, the red-haired man cut the power to the system around midnight. The gang believed they were in the home stretch, just having to patiently drill through the concrete wall with the diamond-tip drill they brought. However, the red-haired man, who had only figured out how to bypass this last door alarm a few weeks before the heist, failed to fully disable it. A silent alarm in the form of a single text was sent to an agent at the security company. The vault's owner was alerted and was told that the police would be dispatched to the scene to check things out. Still, the owner began calling his on-site security guards to see if one of them could head over to take a look and potentially speak to the police on site. The first guard could not come as he was out of town to be with his family for Easter. The second did not answer his phone. After about an hour, the owner eventually got through to the second guard, who agreed to go back out and have a look. At this point, the vault's owner was already on his way, so he told the guard to meet him there. Because of where he lived, the guard made it to the scene before the owner did. The guard checked the front door and peeked through the mail slot in the back. Both doors were locked, and he saw no signs of forced entry. He saw no suspicious figures or vehicles, and he heard nothing. No commotion, no alarm. Even more strikingly, there was no police. The guard interpreted this to mean that the police had come and seen nothing just as he had, so they left. Little did he know that a miscommunication between the security alarm company and the police meant that the police had never been sent to the scene. He called his boss back, who was just a 5-minute drive away at this point, and told him, quote, "false alarm." The guard reported his observations to the owner and convinced him that everything was fine and that they should both head home. The owner turned back around without ever seeing the scene himself. He felt secure in this decision as his trusted guard was so sure everything was fine. On top of that, there had been a false alarm previously when the old sensors mistook a bug for a burglar. The owner returned to his home to enjoy the long weekend with his family. He put the false alarm out of his mind. After all, the Hatton Garden vault was impenetrable, right? Back in the basement, the gang continued on to the next step of the plan, equally unaware that the alarm had gone off and that a security guard was poking around. The drill they would use to cut through the cement was so big that it had to be anchored to the floor. The gang planned to cut 3 overlapping holes in a line and then crawl through the slit they created. However, each hole took 30 to 60 minutes to drill and required the gang to periodically douse the bit in water to avoid it overheating. After 3 long hours in the cramped basement, the gang punched the final hole in the concrete. They removed the drill and peered through the thick cement dust now filling the air. They expected to see hundreds of safety deposit boxes, but when they looked through the hole, all they saw was a smooth, gray, metal surface. The gang was confused at first, unsure of what they were seeing. However, they quickly realized that they were looking at the back of the metal cabinet that housed the boxes. They grabbed the hydraulic ram that they had brought with them and set it up to push the cabinet over so they could climb through the hole and into the vault. They were mere inches from untold and unlimited riches. Excitedly, the gang began pumping the ram faster and faster until eventually it was under so much pressure that it literally shattered into a dozen pieces. What the criminals didn't know was that the cabinets were bolted into the concrete bunker not only to the floor but also to the ceiling. Their ram was not strong enough, and now they were blocked from achieving their goal by just a few millimeters of metal after hours of laborious work. At 8:06 a.m. on Friday, April 3rd, nearly 12 hours after they arrived at the vault, the gang loaded their gear back into the white van and drove away empty-handed. Remarkably, the following day, Saturday, April 4th, the gang returned in the same white van in the same disguises, but they were missing a few members. The remaining members of the gang re-entered the building but noticed that the gate they had left open was now shut and locked. The workaholic jeweler Lionel Whiffen had returned to his shop earlier in the day and noticed the gate was ajar. He checked the basement door but thankfully had locked behind the gang as they left the day before. Otherwise, he would have stumbled upon the attempted burglary before any of the loot was missing. But he just locked the gate and went into his shop. Here he would stay until 9 p.m. Finally, Whiffen locked up and drove away. The men could get back to work. They made their way back to the vault after the same mysterious red-haired man once again unlocked the front door and let them in the fire escape. The men returned with a new, much stronger hydraulic ram. They lined it up, secured it to the floor, and once again began pumping. The metal of the cabinet began to creak, and the bolts began to break out of the concrete with a forceful pop. The men thought that this ram was going to shatter as well, until an ear-shattering bang. The man pumping the ram got thrown to the ground with the force of the release, and concrete dust got blown back into the air. Yet again, the gang peered through the dust to look through the hole. They saw hundreds of security boxes lining the inside of the vault. An unknown number of gang members crawled through the 51 centimeter or 20-inch hole and began ripping the boxes off the wall. When they were done, all surfaces in and around the vault were scrubbed with bleach to remove any possible DNA and to degrade or destroy fingerprints and fibers. At 6:44 a.m. on Easter Sunday, April 5, 2015, the men loaded bags full of gold, jewels, and cash into the white van and once again drove away, this time having completed their mission. It was believed that the true figure of how much loot was stolen was closer to 14 million pounds, or a little over 16 million US dollars. These thieves did appear to be professionals, having entered and exited the building not just once, but twice, leaving no forensic evidence or any other sign of their identity on the CCTV cameras. Due to the mysterious red-haired man's access to the building, rumors spread that it may have been an inside job. According to some sources, business was not going well for the vault's owners as many customers owed them money and other customers took their business elsewhere. Once again, I am saying this is a rumor. I was unable to find any concrete evidence of this, and I do not know with whom this rumor began. Still, I thought it was important enough to mention as it was a line of inquiry for the media and the police for a short time. When this inquiry was found to be unsubstantiated, police were stumped. CCTV images and videos were released to the public, and the media named the gang members Mr. Ginger, the Gent, the Tall Man, the Old Man, Mr. Strong, and Mr. Montana. But police were no closer to finding the real names of the men. They had no forensics, no witnesses, and no hope, until a young detective decided to take a closer look at the CCTV from the area outside of the times of the crimes. At first, he didn't see anything suspicious. He did not see the men in the workmen's uniforms casing the area, he did not see the red-haired man come or go from the building, and he did not see the white van that the thieves had used during the crime. But something did catch his eye. He noticed that on the day of the second part of the robbery, Saturday, April 4th, a distinctive black Mercedes-Benz with a white hood and roof and yellow alloy wheels drove around the block not once, not twice, not even 3 times. This car circled the block 5 times before leaving the area. He knew it was suspicious, but how could such an elite gang of jewel thieves possibly make the mistake of casing the joint in such a noticeable and unique vehicle? Police ran the plate number of the Mercedes to see who it belonged to. To their amazement, its owner was 74-year-old John Kenny Collins. Kenny Collins, who was born September 5th, 1940, had a criminal record stretching back nearly 50 years into his childhood. Some of his previous crimes included robbery and theft back in the 60s. He fit the profile of the kind of man police were looking for, except for the glaringly obvious fact that he was no burly young thief, but rather a senior citizen in his 70s who suffered from diabetes, arthritis, and memory loss. He loved his Staffordshire Terrier named Dempsey, and a former fellow inmate described him as, quote, the man with the hardest head and the biggest heart in London. Still, police were suspicious that even if he was not directly involved in the heist, he had knowledge of the plans. How else would he know to case the joint between the two attempts, likely in order to see if the alarm had been raised? After 5 passes, seeing no sign of police or an investigation, Kenny was satisfied and went to tell the gang that the coast was clear. Police placed Collins under surveillance. They bugged phones, planted cameras and microphones in public areas, and began identifying and investigating anyone he came in contact with. Quickly, police learned who else was part of the gang, and to their amazement, all but 2 were senior citizens between 58 and 76 years old. Police would later learn that Kenny Collins was the gang's lookout, or at least he was supposed to be. He somehow had a key to 25 Hatton Garden, the building just across the street from the vault entrance. After parking the van, he stationed himself across the street with a walkie-talkie to keep watch for the crew. However, being 74 years old and suffering from many health conditions, Kenny Collins actually fell asleep at his post. While he was asleep the first night, the security guard showed up to check the area after the silent alarm was triggered. This is why the gang was completely unaware that the alarm had gone off until they were arrested weeks later. Apparently, this happened several times, and at one point another member of the gang actually had to leave the vault building to go wake him up across the street after they couldn't reach him with the walkie. He even left his post once to go buy fish and chips. Now let me introduce you to the rest of the Hatton Garden gang, also known as, quote, the Grandad gang. To the left of Kenny Collins, you'll see Terrence Terry Perkins. Perkins was a 67-year-old ex-con with medical issues, taking a staggering 29 medications per day. It is said that he brought 3 days' worth of medications into the vault with him in case they were in there for a long time or somehow got trapped or caught. He was born April 4th, 1948, and if you think the date sounds familiar, it's because Terry spent his 67th birthday committing the heist with his pals. How sweet, just a good old heist with the boys. Ironically, the Security Express robbery, which caught him a 22-year sentence back in 1983, was also committed on his birthday, that time his 35th. He and his co-conspirators for that robbery held the drivers at gunpoint and spoke in fake Irish accents, calling each other Paddy 1, Paddy 2, and Paddy 3. As I said, he was caught, convicted, and sentenced to 22 years in prison. However, in 1995, while at an open-air prison in Spring Hill, Terry literally just walked out of prison and remained free for 17 years until 2012. He was briefly jailed again and released shortly before the Hatton Garden heist. Peter Wilton, the lead detective who caught Perkins in 1983, stated, "I was completely flabbergasted when asked what he thought when he saw Perkins once again, the suspect of such a scheme." Now in his 70s, the retired detective said, quote, "Having been involved in the biggest cash robbery in the UK at the time, and then getting captured and sentenced to 22 years, I would have thought he'd have learned a lesson and retired and got on with his property letting, but obviously he decided to have one more go for his pension." Still on the top row, but to the right of Kenny Collins, you see Danny Jones. Danny is one of the younger of the group at only 60 years old. Unlike most of his colleagues, Danny was in pretty good shape and had no severe health issues. However, Danny was very peculiar. Called eccentric by friends, Danny was known to routinely sleep in his mother's dressing gown and a fez hat. He also spoke to his dog constantly, and friends said that he truly believed his dog was a human and spoke back to him. I'm just pausing here for a quick minute to say I don't think it's weird to talk to animals. I personally have 7 cats, and I regularly speak to them. However, Danny appeared to be somewhat delusional in his beliefs, and that's where the issue is here. Alright, back to the video. Danny also had a rap sheet, including his arrest in 1982 for stealing over 100,000 pounds worth of jewelry. Lastly, on the top row, all the way to the right, you'll see 76-year-old Brian Reeder. Born February 28, 1939, Brian, also known as the Governor or the Master, was both the oldest member of the crew and apparently its leader. Brian was well known to police in the area, as back in the 80s he had been tried for the murder of an undercover police officer along with another man named Kenneth Noy. The undercover officer, named John Fordham, was hiding in Noy's backyard wearing a ski mask. Upon finding the intruder, Kenneth Noy stabbed him to death in self-defense. Brian, who had been at the scene but inside the house, fled on foot but was caught. Despite the work of the police to try and get justice for one of their own, both men were acquitted. Kenneth for self-defense, and Brian because the jury believed he genuinely had no part in the crime. However, shortly after his acquittal, Brian would be indicted and convicted for his participation in a 26 million pound gold bullion heist in 1983. He served 9 years in prison for this. All the while, his loving and loyal wife Lynn waited for his return home. Following his release, he worked in the second-hand car business and in property development. It is said that Brian absolutely adored his wife Lynn, and was devastated in 2009 when she passed away after a battle with cancer. Then, in 2013, while trimming a tree on his property, Brian fell and broke his neck. In the final years before the crime, he himself was diagnosed with both prostate cancer and subsequently neutropenia, which made him very susceptible to illness and disease. Despite being the so-called ringleader, Brian did not return to the heist on the second day. Between his health and the stress of the job, he could not cope and abandoned the heist after the first night when they couldn't bust down the metal cabinet. These four, Kenny Collins, Terry Perkins, Danny Jones, and Brian Reeder, are said to be the ringleaders of the gang, along with another man who we'll get to in a moment. On the bottom left, you will see Hugh Doyle, 48, who was accused of storing the looted goods in his flat for the gang. I could not find much on Hugh other than that he was an Irishman who moved to London when he was 16. He subsequently lived on the streets until finally becoming a plumber. Hugh is a self-described, quote, Catholic atheist, who knew some of the gang from around the neighborhood and from their favorite drinking hole. To his right is 60-year-old William Billy the Fish Lincoln. He suffered from incontinence and had received 2 hip replacements, among other medical struggles. Lincoln is said to have been one of the getaway drivers and would eventually help the gang move the goods to Enfield, where weeks after the heist they would finally split up the treasure. He was recruited to the gang by his uncle, John Kenny Collins. To the right of Billy the Fish, you see 58-year-old Carl Wood. Not much is known about Wood other than that he was on disability from Crohn's disease and had over 100,000 pounds in debt at the time of the heist. He is said to have helped the gang on the first night, but like Brian Reeder, his nerves got the best of him and he backed out on the second attempt. The other members who continued without him reported being relieved, as all he did was pace and complain on the first night. Finally, on the bottom right, we have our mystery man with the red hair, known only to the gang as Basil. According to the other members of the gang, this mystery man was the true mastermind of the heist. Unlike the other criminals who seemed unaware of the electronic surveillance at the vault, this Basil was seen carrying a large black garbage bag full of something on his shoulder and using it to cover his face as he passed cameras. He was said to be an electrical security system master. Even after all the other men were arrested, the mysterious Basil was still just a blurry image on a tape. The other members claimed that they had no idea who Basil really was, and that they didn't care to find out any personal information about him. All they knew was that he somehow had access to the building, and he, quote, came and went throughout the night. A £20,000 reward was offered for information leading to the arrest of Basil, but his identity would remain a mystery. During the police investigation and surveillance of the gang, they heard from several people in the area who claimed they had been asked if they wanted to be part of the gang, but had declined. They also heard in several calls and on videos taken by hidden cameras in public that the gang was openly boasting about their crime and what they were going to do with their share of the money once the investigation had settled and they could divvy up the loot. In one video, you can even see Terry Perkins reenacting how they pumped the ram for Brian Reeder, since he was not present on the second night. Police watched the crew and patiently waited 6 weeks for them to finally split the loot, known as the slaughter. In that time, police discovered that Danny and Kenny took the same distinctive Mercedes to several hardware stores before the second attempt, where they purchased the new ram using Collins' own name and address. They also found that Brian Reeder actually rode the bus to the crime using a free senior bus pass that he had received. However, when he left, he used his own. Finally, the gang met to split the loot, which is what the police had been waiting for. This way, all of those involved would be in possession of stolen goods at the time of their arrest. On May 19, 2015, more than 200 police officers were involved in raids on 12 separate addresses. 7 of the men, Terry Perkins, Kenny Collins, Danny Jones, Hugh Doyle, William Lincoln, Brian Reeder, and Carl Wood, were all taken into custody without much of a struggle, other than when Danny tried to run and poor, incontinent William peed himself. The following day, 2 more arrests were made. John Harbinson, 42, who was a taxi driver and William Lincoln's nephew, had unknowingly transported the stolen goods for his uncle. He was charged but later acquitted due to lack of evidence of his involvement. The other man arrested was Brian Reeder's son, also named Brian. He went by Paul though, so that's what I'll be calling him to avoid confusion. Paul lived with his elderly father, who did not know how to use a cell phone and didn't even have one of his own. Members of the gang would commonly call Paul and ask him to give the phone to his father. After passing off his phone, the gang would discuss the plans and details of the crime. Paul was originally charged as a co-conspirator and was held in jail for months before the Crown finally believed his story and dropped the charges against him. During the raids and subsequent searches, police found loads of evidence in the men's homes. Not only did they find some of the missing treasure, but they also found phones, laptops, books, and clothes used for the crime. Some of the most ridiculous discoveries included searches for drill sites, including Drilling Online and Drill Tech, as early as 2012 on Danny's computer, and a copy of the book that every criminal needs, Forensics for Dummies. Police would reveal that the gang had been planning the crime for more than 3 years. They had regular meetings, usually on Fridays, at their favorite bar, Castle Pub, to plan. This is the same bar at which police got video of Terry reenacting the crime for Brian. It's believed that one of the men, possibly Basil, actually took a tour of the vault posing as a potential client. The security guard confirmed that he himself had taken several potential customers on tours and did not keep any kind of log of who or when. He also told police that the company had cycled through several temporary security guards during the months before the heist, and it was possible that one of them had given a tour or was potentially even part of the gang, though this has never been proven. The men learned how to use the drill by watching YouTube videos and planned the rest based on their experiences in the crime world. However, the men failed to take into account the advances in technology that they clearly did not know about or understand. The former head of the Hatton Garden investigation, retired police commander Peter Spindler, was quoted as saying that the men were, quote, analog criminals operating in a digital world. They were really good at the old school methods of avoiding leaving forensic evidence behind, using brute force when necessary, and efficiently getting in and out without drawing too much attention. However, they were unprepared to deal with the intensive electronic surveillance that nearly every inch of London is covered in, and that would be their downfall. Still, the public at large rooted for the, quote, Diamond Weezers, as they would eventually be called. The public at large believed that the crime was victimless. No one was injured, no one was killed, and no one was held captive. Those that lost their possessions were the crime bosses and other rich people in the city. However, these jewelers were generally not big companies with several locations and connections around the world. They were small, family-owned, mom-and-pop shops who kept their entire inventory locked in the vault over the long weekend, along with several heirlooms and the money from their life's work. Money that was for their retirement and to pass on to their children and grandchildren once they had passed away. Many had their businesses damaged badly, and some even lost their business entirely, including Hatton Garden Safety Deposit Limited itself, which went into liquidation shortly after the heist. Admittedly, there was also a rumor that the gang had stolen various valuable items from a box belonging to an organized crime boss who was very mad about it and demanded they return what was taken. Basil, though, was still on the run. Police and the media theorized that perhaps he had left the country and that's why he seemingly vanished after the crime. Danny remained adamant that he did not know who Basil really was, but would tell reporters that someone had told him Basil was an ex-police officer who had gotten into the security game after leaving the force. He claimed that Basil was the brains and that he hid keys and codes throughout the building. However, this was the only information any of the men was willing to divulge, and it did not help the police in pretty much any way. With nothing left to do, police went back through all of the evidence they had collected through the surveillance and the investigation. And this time, they found something, or rather, someone. On April 17th and April 24th, 2015, Kenny Collins met with an unknown man. Police had followed this man to his home and recorded his address for further investigation later. Upon searching, they found that this man's name was Michael Seed. Michael was a 54-year-old hermit who lives off-grid, paying the rent for his council flat in cash. He had no job, no phone, no vehicle, and only had one bank account which he used very rarely to buy things off the internet. Born on August 9, 1960, Michael was the son of a Cambridge professor who grew up in a middle-class home. He grew up visiting Cambridge and took A-levels in physics, chemistry, math, and geology. A-levels are similar to AP classes and exams in the United States. He went to Nottingham University where he graduated with a degree in physics and electronics. However, while living on campus, Michael began using marijuana daily and then LSD on the weekends. In 1984, at 24 years old, Michael would be sentenced to 3 years prison time for selling 10 LSD tablets and some cannabis to a friend. After release, Michael became an electronic repairman, working on TVs, video recorders, and computers. In the 1990s, Michael joined the jewelry business, hoping to make more money. This is when he first met Brian Reeder. Reeder then introduced him to Kenny Collins and Danny Jones. He did not know Terry Perkins before the heist. Police watched him for 2 years, trying to get enough evidence for an arrest warrant for Michael and a search warrant for his flat. However, everything police had was circumstantial at best, and no judge would sign off. Because he lived mostly off-grid, the only evidence police could find was similarities between Michael and Basil on CCTV recordings, such as him covering his face, much like Basil did on the nights of the heist. Finally, after watching hours of video, a very observant detective realized that Basil and Michael walked in a very similar way. Somewhat like a small limp, he would throw one foot out in front before placing it on the ground. Police had an expert take a look and they confirmed that the two could be the same person. With this, police got the warrants that they had been hoping for. Michael Seed was arrested on March 27, 2018. Upon his arrest, police found jewelry, gold bars with serial numbers matching the ones stolen from the vault, and a smelter in his flat. On his desk were 2 encrypted micro SD cards wrapped in tinfoil. Police broke through the first encryption only to find the cards full of family photos. However, they've been unable to break through the second layer of encryption. They also found 280 books, magazines, and newspaper clippings about electronics, phones, surveillance, and jewelry, as well as 5 computers on which Michael had searched the price of gold before the heist and read articles after the heist about the crime. Finally, they found 150 handwritten pages of notes, names, addresses, phone numbers, diagrams, calculations, and little phrases which appeared to be him trying to learn Portuguese. Finally, the last member of the gang was behind bars. Terry Perkins, Danny Jones, and Kenny Collins all pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit burglary and were each sentenced to 7 years behind bars. The evidence against them included them talking about committing the crime and the stolen goods in their homes when they were arrested. They had little chance to win if their cases went to trial. Carl Wood and William Lincoln pled not guilty, but were convicted of both conspiracy to commit burglary and conspiracy to conceal, convert, or transfer criminal property. Wood received a 6-year jail term and Lincoln got 7 years. Hugh Doyle pled not guilty and was convicted of converting or transferring criminal property. He served 21 months and then a 2-year suspended sentence, similar to parole. As stated before, John Harbinson had been arrested and charged. Police believed that the jewelry they had found hidden in his home was from the vault. However, using old family photos, he and his wife were able to prove that they had owned the jewelry for at least 15 years before the heist. He was found not guilty and released. Brian Reeder pled guilty to his charges and was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months. In 2018, a confiscation ruling was put in place. This ruling meant that Kenny Collins, Danny Jones, Terry Perkins, and Brian Reeder were ordered to pay a total of £27.5 million or face another 7 years in prison. Just a week later, in February 2018, Terry Perkins would die in his jail cell. An investigation into his death showed that staff did not properly care for him given his health conditions. Between staff miscommunication and a lack of walkie-talkies, help for Terry was too late. Furthermore, during his autopsy, the leads to his implanted electronic heart monitor were cut, potentially erasing crucial and non-recoverable information about the circumstances of his death. Still, the court went after his estate to recover the funds he owed. In March 2019, Michael Seed was convicted of conspiracy to burgle and money laundering. He got 10 years in prison and a £6 million confiscation order that will go into effect in 2029 if he's unable to pay. He will face 7 more years. Danny Jones was unable to pay his share, and on August 1, 2018, he was sentenced to serve a further 6.5 years in jail. While in jail, Danny wrote to several people, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, to complain about the conditions in the prison. He also began to claim that if the police took him with them, he would lead them to where he hid his share of the stash. Police were unable to just take a prisoner out into the public, so Danny wrote to Martin Brunt, the crime correspondent at Sky News, and told him, quote, "Whatever I get on Judgment Day, I will stand tall, but I want to make amends to all my loved ones and show I am trying to change. I know it seems a bit late in my life, but I'm trying." Eventually, police got permission to take Danny to this alleged hiding spot. He brought them to Edmonton Cemetery, where he pointed out a plot belonging to his in-laws and told police the loot was buried under one of the stones. Police promptly brought Danny back to prison and left him there while they went to dig. Over 4 hours, a team of searchers located a small amount of jewelry where Danny had pointed them. When asked, he confirmed this was his only stash. Unfortunately for Danny, the police were not dumb, and they found his larger stash of treasure hidden a few plots away. The following year, on August 1, 2019, Kenny Collins was sentenced to a further 6.5 years as well. Brian Reeder was taken to court after he was unable to pay like the other two. However, due to his failing health from his cancer and a series of strokes he suffered behind bars, the judge declined to impose 7 more years on the fragile man. Carl Wood was released in 2021 and continues to work as a plumber. Danny Jones was released earlier in 2022. To date, £3.5 million of recovered jewelry has been returned to the victims, only about 1/3 of the total amount that is believed to have been taken. Any recovered jewelry that could not be identified and verified was sold at auction. As of October 2020, only £1.5 million have been paid to the victims. Since the crime occurred, several full-length movies, documentaries, a TV miniseries, a TV show, and a radio play have all been made based on the heist. Most recently, it was announced that the Museum of London is relocating the strong room, including the safe deposit boxes, the door, and the infamous drilled hole in the concrete, to the museum to become a tourist attraction and to preserve its infamy. To avoid structural issues with the building, the only part of the concrete that will be removed is the area around the 3 drilled holes. Once complete, this exhibit will be the centerpiece of the, quote, pastime gallery at the museum's Smithfield Market location. The vault will be moved in late 2022 or early 2023. However, this new location for the museum will not be open to the public until 2025. Once installed, it will be there for good. Miss Sharon Ahmet, the museum's current director, has said, "For us to collect a hole will be a new thing for the museum, but once this goes in, it's never going out again. It's my legacy to the museum forever, and the future directors will either love me or curse me for it." But why would a bunch of grandpas who had seemingly retired from the criminal world risk it all? Simple. Many of them had health problems and had lost important people in their lives. As one of the men said on a tape taken by police during their surveillance, "If we get nicked, at least we can hold our heads up that we had one last go." They knew that their time was coming to an end, and they decided to give it one more shot. One last job to make them go down in infamy. And if that was the goal, I think it's safe to say they made it. I'm not going to do a whole segment about my thoughts on this case. It's not super controversial, and I feel like I already gave you a lot of information, so I don't want to overwhelm you even more. The one thing that I do want to say is that this case was really fun to research and write about. I was constantly surprised by just how strange and honestly absurd parts of this story were. I know they were criminals who had done bad stuff in their lives, but I honestly think some of them are hilarious, and I would love to grab a drink and listen to their stories. I'm sure there are so many more wild stories that nobody knows about, and I'd love to pick their brains. Lastly, I've always wanted to visit London, so maybe I'll have to plan myself a trip when the museum opens so I can see the vault myself and maybe even visit their favorite bar, the Castle Pub. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out in the YouTube algorithm so my content gets recommended to new viewers. Likewise, please share, as the more views I can get, the better. I am excited to continue making these videos, and I'm beyond thankful for all the support I have received so far. I'd like to do a small giveaway of some kind when I hit, let's say, maybe 100 subscribers, so make sure to share this with your friends and family. I hope you all have an amazing day or night wherever you are. I will see you next time. Bye, guys. And just remember, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.